Okay. Welcome everyone to our presentation. My name is Agnieszka, and together with my colleagues Isabel and Nina, I would like to present our final project entitled the Second Order Adaptive Network Model for Exam-Related Anxiety Regulation. So in our final project, we decided to focus on the topic of mental processes related to anxiety and specifically to exam anxiety. Which is defined in the literature of psychology as a set of different responses that accompany the concern someone might have about possible negative evaluation or loss of competence while performing sort of evaluative situation, for example, an exam. In general, it is perceived that anxiety has positive motivating consequences, but only when it's experienced in moderate amounts. Because once this emotion becomes too strong and overwhelming, it can bring a lot of adverse effects, such as, for example, insomnia, inability to concentrate, migraines, and these negative consequences may actually significantly hamper individuals' performance. And the solution that the literature suggests for this sort of problem is employing emotion regulation strategies, which are, as their name indicates, strategies or even as sometimes called abilities to effectively control what emotions we experience, when and how we express them. And now let me tell you a bit more about the context and the motivation for our project. So our starting point was noticing how the exam anxiety processes changed recently due to the switch from offline examination mode to mainly online exams. And why we argue they changed is because there are new mental states, new worries that now contribute to the overall anxiety levels. For example, students may worry about potential internet problems or technical issues with the examination system. However, there are also certain problems which are not present in the online setting. For example, social anxiety someone may experience related to interactions with the colleagues in the examination room. And all of this led us to the idea of first comparing the exam anxiety between the two different contexts, so the online and offline examination. Moreover, we decided to study the role that emotion regulation strategies have in modifying exam anxiety, and to also employ adaptive modeling approach about which Nina will tell you now a bit more.
Yeah, and just like we mentioned before, now we are going to think about how to design the states for our network model. So first of all, we will have two states that represent the online exam and offline exam as the modality. And later on, we think about some kind of issues or problems that may happen. And we basically categorize them into two big groups, the before exams issues and the during exam issues. And then we were thinking about some filling preparation states, which finally leads to the exam anxiety. And also, just like we mentioned before, we wanted to stimulate the emotional regulation. So we also have some control state and some opposite beliefs. And to introduce the Hebbian learning process, we also have the W states and H states. So here comes our design of the multi-layer network modeling. Just like we mentioned before, in the base level, we first have this online exam or offline exam. So which means that if we are in the online exam setting, this one will be a constant 1 and the other one will be a constant 0. And the second line, that lines here are the issues that we just mentioned that happening before or during exams. And here we set two beliefs which have the opposite beliefs here. One is about the stable and comfortable environment, and the other one is about the type of questions. And we consider those two as the ones that we wanted to introduce the emotional regulation. And then we have this four filling, we call it filling representation, filling preparation states, and which then these two, the exam anxiety. And the blue and purple layers are the first and second verification layers that we're using for the Habian learning process. And so here comes to our stimulations.
Yeah, so as my colleagues were saying, we aim to compare an online and an offline setting. So of course here to obtain the online simulation, we define the online exam state as one for the entire simulation, and of course the offline exam state as 0. And here we can see the first reappraisal occurring, because at the beginning, it's normal that the student is worried about having a comfortable environment to have the exam, to make it as silent as possible. And once the exam anxiety starts rising, the control state about these negative and positive beliefs increases too, and therefore there is this effect of the first reappraisal, as I was saying, in which this negative belief decreases and the positive belief about the type of environment increases, because for example, the student can consider that maybe his or her bedroom are even more comfortable than a classroom setting. And in a second part, there is the second reappraisal, because maybe at the beginning of the exam, the student is very worried about the type of questions, because the student is not used to this modality. But then once the exam starts, the student can consider, okay, the type of question is different, but maybe it's easier or simpler to answer. And therefore we see the effect of this reappraisal here, in which the negative belief about the type of question decreases and the positive belief increases. We see this effect in the overall anxiety, in the overall exam anxiety here, that is regulated, it decreases. And as my colleagues were saying, this is a second order adaptive model. So we have these two W states here that affect the connection weights between the exam anxiety and the two control states, and also the H states here that affect their speed. Here we have the example of an offline exam, and of course we obtain it in the other way around, with the offline exam state defined as 1 for the entire simulation and the online exam state as 0. And here you can see that the overall anxiety felt by the student is much lower than in the setting before. And there are states that here are higher. For instance, the worry about getting late due to external factors like transportation, for example. But there are also other states that are lower. And in our case, that we were defining the reappraisal about the worry of the environment, this state doesn't exist at all, because the student doesn't need to be worried about having a silent environment. And therefore, of course, the positive belief about it also doesn't activate. And we also see that this reappraisal never occurs. And even the second reappraisal that was already during the exam, it happens, but the effect is much slower, which is normal because the anxiety is not that high. So the control state doesn't get that activated in comparison to the case before. And therefore, the negative and the positive beliefs about the type of questions are more stable than before. And this is also normal because the students were already used to this type of questions and they don't need to be worried about this. And since this student doesn't need to learn how to regulate the exam anxiety because it was not that high, the states related to the Habian learning also don't increase that much, as you can see here. In these two examples, we were able to model the pre-exam states before the during exam states, but you could see that the timeline was not very precise, in the sense that the pre-exam period was compressed, and there were some states that should not be active anymore once the exam starts, and the other way around, and this was still happening. And to overcome this, we introduced two extra states, which were the pre-exam and the during exam states. These two are two step functions, as you can see them here, the pre-exam and the during exam state. And we made some other states depending on them. And you could see here the effect of the first reappraisal in the exam anxiety, and also here once the exam starts. But this, unfortunately, it's a non-adaptive model, so we still need to adapt it in order to make it more realistic.
Yes, and to sum up a little bit what Isabel said, and to provide some kind of confirmation, some logic behind our simulations, why they make sense. First, the emotion regulation processes work as they should. So first we observe some decline in positive beliefs when anxiety kicks in. But as the control states rise and get stronger, the positive beliefs also get stronger and the negative beliefs decline. Also, we observed that in all simulations, the pre-exam states, they have similar patterns, so they change in a similar time, and the during the exam states also change together. And states which could be more prevalent in the online context, for example, issues with receiving assistance when needed, rise to higher values in the online setting than in the offline one, and the other way around for specific offline specific states. Also, the general anxiety levels are higher in the online exams than in the offline ones. And finally, the adaptive models also show desired behavior, meaning that adding adaptive layers make the states affected by adaptation develop slower. But in the end, the levels at which they stabilize are very similar to those reached without adaptation. And yes, that's all that we had for today. And if you have any questions, we'll be happy to provide some answers.